And the winner is, in Hollywood, Rod Serling.
He gave us a fifth dimension beyond sight and sound. But what Rod Serling left behind in the real world was even more unbelievable.
I don't know how deserving I am, but I do know how grateful. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
While most people remember him for the Twilight Zone, few realize just how big his fortune grew, and how deeply his family still benefits from it. Did the mastermind of science fiction quietly build one of Hollywood's most profitable legacies? From buried contracts to a vault of ideas still generating millions, you're about to see how Serling's empire continues to grow, even 5 decades after his death. The screenwriter who changed everything. Rod Serling wasn't born into power, privilege, or even the comfort of stability. He came from Binghamton, New York, a small-town kid with a big imagination and a burning sense of justice. His early life was shaped by war, trauma, and a feeling that the world didn't quite make sense. After serving in World War II as a paratrooper in the Pacific, Serling returned home with shrapnel in his knee and haunting memories in his mind. But what he brought back wasn't just pain. It was the raw material for storytelling that would challenge everything television stood for. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, live television drama was emerging, and Serling carved a path straight through the heart of it. He wasn't interested in fluff. He wanted to write about race, war, censorship, corruption, and moral failure. His early teleplays, like Patterns and Requiem for a Heavyweight, weren't just popular, they were seismic. Critics called him the conscience of television, and he was just getting started. But that conscience came with consequences. Sponsors and networks repeatedly pressured Serling to tone down his messages. In one now famous example, a script about lynching was watered down so severely that it lost its meaning. Serling was furious. Instead of backing down, he did something revolutionary. He started hiding social commentary in fiction. The result was The Twilight Zone, a show that wrapped hard truths in alien skin and time travel, but never lost its bite. It was a workaround, and it made him very rich. In some 92 of the 156 episodes of the show, he was the writer or co-writer. He was paid per script at the beginning and under standard fees, until a big twist. Serling demanded and received ownership of a major part of the rights of the show. The networks were not too happy about it, but they conceded. They considered The Twilight Zone to be an eccentric gamble. They did not know that Serling had just settled a long-term financial pipeline that would keep his family in wealth for years after his death. Not only a creative victory, but a master stroke in business. Reruns, syndication, and licensing didn't seem like glorious avenues back then. Serling prophesied their potential. He knew that once these stories got into the cultural bloodstream, there was no turning back. From TV marathons to streaming rights, collector's editions, educational use, merchandise, and so on, The Twilight Zone keeps churning out bucks. That legacy began with Serling's fight for control. What set him apart from his contemporaries was his writing, along with his bearing the responsibility. When screenwriters were regarded as throwaways, Serling made himself indispensable. He hosted the show, defined the vision, and became the face of it. He did not just create a world, he branded himself as the key to it. It guaranteed that whenever people talked about The Twilight Zone, they talked about Serling as well, a visibility very rare for writers in the 1950s. That association became part of his net worth. But the economic consequences of ownership were intentionally quiet, not flashy. He was not ostentatious either in flaunting his earnings or moving into palatial estates, but behind closed doors negotiated fiercely. And hidden in that archive was a deal, one so smart, so forward-thinking, it would make the Twilight Zone not just iconic, but eternal. The genius behind the ownership deal. Rod Serling wasn't just a visionary writer, he was a strategic thinker, decades ahead of his time. And the most important move of his career wasn't writing The Twilight Zone, it was owning it. While most creators in the 1950s and 60s signed away rights for quick paychecks, Serling did the unthinkable. He negotiated a deal that made him part owner of the show. That single decision transformed The Twilight Zone from a television program into a perpetual money machine. Back then, television reruns weren't considered particularly valuable. Networks didn't yet understand the goldmine that lay in syndication, international licensing, or re-airing content for decades. Serling did. He pushed hard to retain creative control and a share of the show's future rights. He wanted input on scripts, tone, themes, and most importantly, residuals. This wasn't common practice. Writers were supposed to write, not profit. But Serling refused to be sidelined. He fought for back-end participation, and he won. That deal would prove life-changing. When The Twilight Zone was sold into syndication shortly after its original run ended, the money started flowing. Initially modest, those checks grew as the show took on cult status. Local stations picked it up. Then cable came calling. Then DVDs, Blu-rays, and streaming platforms. Each new format meant a new licensing round, and each one sent money straight to the Serling estate. While other writers faded into obscurity, Serling was becoming immortal, on paper and in profit. With Rod's death in 1975, his wife Carol equally showed her savvy from that point on. After Rod's death, she took charge of the estate for even more lucrative licensing opportunities, but carefully and with much respect for the brand. She said no to any deals that would cheapen the name, and she approved deals that were of value to it instead. This included dealing out merchandise, collector's edition books, academic collections, and licensing courses to universities. The rights to Serling's face, voice, and narrative became sellable commodities. The other crucial element to keeping The Twilight Zone's famous name going was how it kept evolving with the times. This was not just reruns, but reincarnations. It has been through several rebirths, notably in 1985, 2002, and with its latest incarnation in 2019. Each of these presented new licensing opportunities and new streams of revenue. And even from this original deal, the estate profited when others picked up the project with new writers and actors. The idea behind the Zone was Serling's conception, where the moral meets the surreal. It was still famously echoed in every reincarnation. At that moment, it started streaming. During the 2010s, streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Paramount Plus started scrambling for old content libraries. One of the most coveted legacy series was expected to be The Twilight Zone. The content was trapped in a binge-watchable time vacuum and had a truly flexible nature. The questions Serling raised, those of power, corruption, identity, and justice, never ceased to feel urgent, notwithstanding the times. They rediscovered modern audiences who didn't just watch, and each new wave meant millions more in royalties. Commercially, by the early 2000s, The Twilight Zone had earned hundreds of millions across various platforms. Due to an inherited establishment, though, a substantial amount would go into the Serling family trust. It came from Rod's prescience and refusal to be bought off, creating a legacy in which descendants might live comfortably, even lavishly, on a show created more than 60 years ago. Behind closed doors, Serling had been working on something even deeper, a vault of ideas, scripts, and properties he never released. A hidden legacy that, if unlocked, could dwarf even the Twilight Zone fortune. Because Serling didn't just protect what he had, he quietly prepared for what might come next. The Vault of Unused Scripts. Behind Rod Serling's sharp suits, clipped tone, and eerie monologues was a mind that never stopped writing. But what if the Twilight Zone episodes we all know were just the tip of the iceberg? What if there were stories so strange, so provocative, they were left locked away, unfilmed, unread, and untouched for decades? Turns out, that's exactly what happened. Rod Serling was one of the most prolific writers in television history. Throughout his career, he wrote more than 250 scripts, including 92 of the original Twilight Zone episodes. But according to close friends, family, and estate managers, that number doesn't include the dozens of story treatments, outlines, and completed teleplays that never made it to air. These lost works were stored in his archives, what many now refer to as the vault. The existence of this vault was more rumor than reality until the 1990s, when Serling's widow, Carol Serling, began organizing his papers. As she combed through boxes of yellowed pages and brittle carbon copies, she discovered entire stories that had never been published or produced. Some were incomplete ideas, chilling premises without endings. Others were fully polished scripts, complete with dialogue, stage directions, and notes in Rod's unmistakable handwriting. Why were they never used? In some cases, the subject matter was deemed too controversial for 1960s television. Serling never shied away from hard truths. He tackled racism, war, corporate greed, censorship, and totalitarianism at a time when most shows stuck to laugh tracks and happy endings. Several of the unused scripts pushed boundaries even further. One script, uncovered in the vault and reportedly titled The 51st State, told of a future America where citizenship was auctioned off to the highest bidder. Networks refused to touch it. There were stories that Serling did not think his audience was ready for. An ex-CBS editor alleges that an unused script revolved around a machine that could tell a person when to die, not how. It was just so dark, an existential kick in the gut. Serling himself removed it from the list. He told Carol, reportedly, "This one is for later." And now, later, could be here. In 2015, a partnership between Syracuse University, where Serling once taught, and his estate worked to digitize his archives. It was during the archive project that the new wave of unused scripts, some were unknown until then, was confirmed. The Mirror Mind, Hour of the Locusts, and The Collector's Game all appeared, each seemingly hinting at depictions of dark, cerebral tales meant to challenge everything from free will to artificial intelligence. Scholars and screenwriters have only scratched the surface regarding these materials, but the buzz is starting to grow. Indeed, the streaming platforms are already banging on doors. It is said that Amazon, Netflix, and Paramount Plus have been after the estate's rights to develop some new content based on the unseen works. Quite a few new Twilight Zone-type things would be gold projects. Sensitive IP with built-in legacy, built-in aura of mystery, and built-in brand power. It is being said that they are in talks for a limited series, The Forgotten Zone, intended to bring to life Serling's lost stories. And this is where it gets weirder. Some contents of the vault are more than scripts. Others are letters, notes, and journals conveying Serling's thoughts concerning the very essence of storytelling, mortality, and the nature of reality. But one thing's clear. Rod Serling's imagination didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. In that vault, he left behind more than ideas. he left behind a second legacy, still waiting to be unleashed. The posthumous empire. When Rod Serling passed away in 1975 at the age of 50, the world lost a visionary, but his family quietly inherited a legacy built not just on fame, but on intellectual property, moral courage, and enduring cultural relevance. At the time, few could have imagined that the man who once struggled with censors and sponsors would, decades later, become the nucleus of a multi-million-dollar posthumous empire. But that's exactly what happened, thanks in large part to the people he left behind. At the center of it all was Carol Serling, Rod's wife and fiercest guardian. She didn't just protect his memory, she curated, monetized, and extended it. In the years after his death, Carol worked tirelessly to preserve Rod's legacy with integrity. She turned down offers that didn't feel authentic. When studios approached with reboot ideas or licensing proposals that commercialized Serling's message or distorted his values, she walked away. That restraint is exactly what made the Serling name even more valuable in the long run. Carol recognized early on that Rod Serling was more than a television writer, he was a brand. And in an era before branding was a household word, she began treating his intellectual property like one. She approved select anthologies, sanctioned merchandise, and helped establish the Twilight Zone as not just a TV show, but a cultural institution. Her decisions were methodical, strategic, and always centered on Rod's original mission: to challenge, provoke, and illuminate. Under her direction, Rod's legacy expanded into education. She championed the donation of his papers to Ithaca College and Syracuse University, preserving his scripts, letters, and academic work for future generations. Schools and universities began using the Twilight Zone as curriculum, not just for film or writing, but for ethics, philosophy, and political science. Serling's words were now required reading, his moral compass held up as a guidepost for future thinkers. With the passage of time, the Twilight Zone catalog improved in value. Reruns all over the world came in the 1980s and 90s and introduced a new audience to Rod's voice. VHS boxes formed into DVDs. Then came the digital platforms. Each new form carried with it a new opportunity for licensing. The Twilight Zone was one of the earliest classic TV series to successfully go to streaming, which meant continuing revenue to the estate. Carol spearheaded reviving Serling's voice in contemporary formats. In the 2000s, she collaborated in launching graphic novels, as well as audio productions based on his abandoned scripts. It wasn't going to be a retake, but a carefully chosen collection of works which best expressed the spirit of Serling. Some warning against technology, a parable against prejudice, a twist on fate. Each of those releases built on the brand, keeping Rod's values indeed in the conversation. But the biggest one was from licensing and naming. In recent years, Serling's name and face have appeared on everything from collectible editions and coffee table books to exclusive streaming deals. CBS's decision in 2019 to reboot The Twilight Zone under the aegis of Jordan Peele undoubtedly had much to do with Carol's blessing. Although she passed away in 2020, the estate she structured lives on, carefully supervised by her daughters and attorneys. Her stewardship ensured that his works remained uncompromised, his values unspoiled, and his legacy unshakable. And that legacy wasn't just financial, it was foundational. Because what the Serling family built wasn't just an estate, it was a moral empire, with Rod's vision at the helm and generations benefiting from its steady rise. Twilight Zone Museum and global licensing. Rod Serling's vision extended far beyond the TV screen. and so did his legacy. While his original Twilight Zone episodes became instant classics, the long game wasn't just about reruns or nostalgia, it was about expansion, and perhaps the most ambitious posthumous endeavor tied to Serling's name is one that hasn't yet reached its full potential: a Twilight Zone museum. Paired with a sophisticated global licensing operation, this effort reveals just how massive the Serling legacy has become, and how the world is still buying into his eerie moral universe. For years, fans and industry insiders alike have whispered about the dream of a dedicated museum, a physical space to honor Rod Serling's life, the cultural impact of the Twilight Zone, and the deeper messages behind each episode. The idea was first floated by Serling's widow, Carol, and later amplified by their daughters, who recognized the demand. Fans from across the globe continue to make pilgrimages to Binghamton, New York, Rod's hometown, just to walk the streets he walked, or visit the carousel he once made famous in an episode. Binghamton responded by installing a bronze statue of Serling on the Recreation Park carousel grounds and hosting Twilight Zone-themed events during the annual Serling Fest. But those tributes, while heartfelt, aren't the same as a fully curated permanent museum. Plans for such a facility have been under discussion for years, with community leaders and historians proposing ideas to include original scripts, rare memorabilia, episode props, personal letters, and interactive exhibits. The goal? To build a space that doesn't just memorialize Rod Serling, but immerses visitors in his moral universe. The proposal has drawn interest not just from fans, but from educators, sociologists, and even science fiction authors who see the Twilight Zone as a critical entry point into ethics, technology, and American storytelling. While funding and logistics remain hurdles, industry observers believe a Serling museum would be a tourism magnet and a licensing goldmine. Just as Graceland became a hub for Elvis's brand, or the Walt Disney Family Museum turned into a brand extension, a Serling museum could become the flagship of a growing global empire. And make no mistake, global licensing is already a major pillar of that empire. The estate of Serling has profited enormously from a set of licensing deals since the late 1990s, deals made very largely through CBS and the Serling family. These contracts cover a good deal more than DVD box sets or streaming rights. Name and feel of the Twilight Zone have been invoked in comic books, theme park attractions, lines of apparel, board games, and even slot machines. Each has its specific limits. The estate has always guarded Serling's tone: cerebral, cautionary, haunting. Now, that too is a brand all by itself. One of the very profitable licensing schemes? The Twilight Zone Tower of Terror at a Disney theme park. Designed closer to the theme of the show, this ride combined goosebump storytelling with bungee leaps. The ride has been operating at Disney's Hollywood Studios since 1994. Rod Serling's recreated narration guided visitors through the ride and turned what might have otherwise been merely a thrilling experience into an honor-laden, time-traveling homage. This revenue brought to the estate from the ride, in addition to brand exposure and millions of casual fans in theme parks, has all become part of Serling's universe. In the international market, Serling and the Twilight Zone brand are carefully positioned. These original episodes and newer reboots have been streamed in Japan, France, and Canada. Merchandise, including black and white art prints, graphic novels, and replicas of props, is licensed in limited runs to maintain collector value. Pop-up exhibits, usually co-sponsored by film festivals or science fiction conventions, help raise global awareness of the estate and revenue. Today, combined revenues from licensing, reruns, streaming, and merchandising contribute millions a year. Serling will, therefore, always be relevant and profitable as the world awakens to tech-driven dystopias. An immediate next step is to build a museum, an anchoring point for a global brand still in the process of evolution. But this empire wasn't built just on scripts and reruns. It was crafted with intention, because behind every deal and display, there's still one question guiding the Serling legacy. What would Rod do? And that's what keeps the profits and the purpose intact. A legacy wrapped in dispute. Rod Serling may have been a master at scripting the uncanny and unexpected, but even he couldn't have written the strange drama that followed his death. Behind the camera, Serling was a fiercely private man, calculated, principled, and deeply focused on legacy. But when he passed away in 1975 at just 50 years old, the legal and financial future of his estate quickly became a maze of questions, red tape, and rising tensions. His will, at first glance, seemed clear. But the aftermath? Anything but. Serling's last will named his wife, Carol Serling, as the primary heir and executor of his estate. That part was expected. Carol had been his partner in every sense, both emotionally and professionally. She had supported Rod through the stress of television deadlines, navigated the Hollywood machine, and even managed the early licensing of the Twilight Zone after his passing. But once her name was placed as the legal guardian of his legacy, things got complicated, especially when Serling's intellectual property became exponentially more valuable. At the time of Rod Serling's death, few could have predicted that the Twilight Zone would explode in global cultural relevance, gaining new waves of fans with each generation. With each resurgence, whether through cable reruns, streaming deals, or new merchandise, so too came disputes about who controlled what, and who should benefit from the growing empire Rod Serling had left behind. Carol Serling held firm control over Rod's image, likeness, and script licensing. For decades, she kept the legacy intact with a cautious, respectful approach. But not everyone agreed with her decisions. Some extended family members, and even business partners from Rod's early career, questioned how certain deals were struck, particularly around the time that The Twilight Zone began to re-air on cable in the 1980s and 1990s. Royalties were flowing, but transparency was lacking. There were also rumblings of tensions around newer reboots of The Twilight Zone, including the 1985 and 2002 versions, and later the Jordan Peele-led 2019 revival. Some insiders felt the reboots did not reflect Serling's moral depth or creative tone. Others believed the family estate approved projects for profit rather than principle. A former producer claimed that Rod would have never signed off on several of the modern adaptations. Carol and the estate's lawyers defended the decision, arguing that Serling's works have always been open to interpretation and that adaptation was the best way to keep the conversation alive. Disputes over such issues rarely went public, though. The real battles were fought in quiet negotiations, contract clauses, and private meetings among the estate's managers and agencies seeking licenses. But one such episode elevated long, simmering questions to the surface. A rare early script for the Twilight Zone pilot was sold at auction for an undisclosed sum, and then rumors started circulating that a private collector, not the family, sold it. That raised some eyebrows. Was the estate being quietly stripped of the original assets? Or was this some orchestrated move towards brand management? When Carol Serling passed away in 2020, the entire situation underwent some grayer shadows. Control of the estate passed into the hands of Rod and Carol's two daughters, Anne and Jody Serling. While Anne has done much in the public eye to uphold her father's legacy through books and public appearances, Jody, by and large, has remained private. dual stewardship affords both clarity and ambiguity. One is the public face, and the other, the silent manager. And while that balance normally works, there have been discrepancies reportedly on which licensing deals to pursue, which scripts to issue, and which projects to back down from. And yet, in the face of disputes, court filings, and corporate pressure, one thing remains certain. No one, not family, not studios, not fans, wants to see Serling's vision cheapened, which raises a powerful question for the final chapter. Can a legacy this valuable still hold onto its soul? The fortune that's still growing. Rod Serling may have passed away nearly 5 decades ago, but the legacy he left behind hasn't faded. It's multiplied. In fact, while his voice no longer echoes through studio lots and writers' rooms, his name still moves millions. What started as a modest estate from a respected television writer has quietly transformed into a steadily growing fortune, driven by cultural nostalgia, global licensing, and a timeless brand of storytelling that continues to generate income year after year. When Serling died in 1975, his wealth was largely tied to residuals from The Twilight Zone, screenwriting credits, and modest property holdings. He was respected, but not considered Hollywood royalty by financial standards. Few could have predicted that his ideas, his dystopian visions, moral dilemmas, and speculative what-ifs would age like fine wine. But that's exactly what happened. Over the decades, as culture evolved and media consumption exploded across platforms, Serling's catalog gained more relevance, not less. It began slowly. In the 1980s, reruns of The Twilight Zone started airing on cable, reintroducing the series to Gen X viewers. Then came the VHS tapes, followed by DVD box sets. Every release meant licensing income, residuals, and publishing rights. By the early 2000s, annual revenue from The Twilight Zone alone was generating millions. Holiday marathons became a staple on networks like Sci-Fi, and streaming giants later joined the fray, paying hefty fees to host the anthology series in their libraries. But that was just the beginning. The real game-changer came with the rise of global IP licensing. Serling's estate, managed first by his wife Carol and later by his daughters Anne and Jody, recognized the power of nostalgia in a fragmented media world. Through partnerships with apparel brands, collectible companies, audiobook publishers, and streaming platforms, The Twilight Zone was repackaged again and again. Rod's image, scripts, and voice became assets that extended well beyond the TV screen. For example, in the last 15 years alone, Serling's name has appeared on graphic novels, board games, T-shirts, limited edition vinyl soundtracks, and even NFTs. Each product brought new revenue, and more importantly, introduced Serling to new generations. His face, once known only to boomers who tuned in during the original run, is now seen on streetwear collabs, retro merch, and TikTok edits of classic monologues. Legacy, in Serling's case, has become currency. Even more recently, however, the big studios and streaming services took to the stage again with even bigger offers. For instance, the 2019 reboot of The Twilight Zone, under the direction of Jordan Peele, comes with a multi-million licensing deal for the Serling estate. Another regular but mixed reception for such a show, however, has awoken a newfound thirst for the voice of Rod himself. It reminded the industry that in the age of AI and content beyond count, people still crave stories that pose tough questions about mankind. Last but not least, academia. Universities and literary institutions still engage with Rod Serling's unpublished work for research and study. Several colleges now offer classes entirely revolving around his scripts, topics, and impact. His style is taught as an example blueprint through which social issues can be addressed. these academic rights are not merely symbolic. They are monetized through publishing agreements and licensing fees. Part of the financial ecosystem has now spread to the local turf of Binghamton, New York. The Rod Serling Archive, with the support of the estate, draws tourism and educational partnerships. Everything except for a permanent hub or a museum that would be called after Rod Serling has begun. Early investors have started talking in hushed tones that it could eventually prove a significant cash cow, especially in the current instance where people are going crazy for these immersive entertainment experiences. The numbers talk for themselves. While the figures are exact and closely held within the estate, Forbes reported that all sorts of licensing based around the Twilight Zone and the name of Rod Serling earned low to mid-8 figures annually. That parks him in the rare category of posthumously earning, just below giants such as Elvis Presley and Dr. Seuss, but above many other former entertainers, now nothing more than old memorabilia. And the growth is still on the runway. There's already talk that Serling's voice might be put to new uses, such as new reboots, or even for fan interaction within a virtual reality environment, with AI tools designed to recreate voices and digital likenesses. But the family has yet to approve of any of this happening. Thanks for watching. If you were surprised by what Rod Serling left behind, you'll want to check out our next deep dive into the hidden wealth of other iconic creators. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and step into the next story that's just as mind-bending.